The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi there and welcome. This is Derek Feldman. I am so excited to be with you today because I have a really great friend of mine, colleague, professional, unbelievable. Her name is Gail Perry. Some of you may know her. She has been at the forefront, and what I love is she's at the forefront with the concept of fired up fundraising, which is just remarkable. But we'll get into a little bit more into Gail here in just a minute. But if you've attended any of our sessions before, remember that they are recorded. We do take these recorded sessions and distribute them for later on for your usage. And of course, the presentation from today is also available at a future time as well. So Gail Perry, boy, what can we say? She is really one of the foremost experts here on board fundraising. And Gail is with us for the next 45 minutes to the hour to talk about what she's seeing, some things that she's learned, and I'll say to keep you all excited about how to get those board members to do things for you, including raise money. What's been exciting about what Gail is doing is that she has really taken concepts of the struggles that we deal with when it comes to fundraising, figuring out a way that you can message it correctly to board members to get them involved. And that's a fantastic piece for all of us. So without further ado, Gail, welcome. We're excited to have you.
Yeah, thanks, Derek. I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, excellent. Well, Gail, before we sort of get started here, tell us a little bit about you.
Well, you know, I counted up the years I've been in fundraising, and it's not quite about 25. Woohoo!
Yes.
I know. And I started. I had a sales background before I started in fundraising, and I worked at Duke University for my first job, and then I went to UNC Chapel Hill and ran the Keenan Flagler Business School fundraising program. So I sort of approach a lot of this work I do now as a consultant and blogger and speaker from, I have a big university background, but I've also been very involved founding small organizations and raising small gifts. So my heart goes out to the small, scrappy organizations who are really trying to make it too. So I try to make my approach very broad because, quite frankly, Derek, the institution of boards, they're all the same and they have the same problems. They're just awful.
Well, Gail, what's interesting, board fundraising is probably a topic that not a lot of us, including myself, we do a ton on, except, when it comes to the time of when we really need them to execute. But what sort of got you to this point to say, boy, I want to sort of conquer the world and help people understand board fundraising better?
Well, I used to be a little bit intimidated by the idea of boards and fundraising because they were like authority figures. And then as a consultant, I was working with a bunch of boards on capital campaigns. And these people were, they were very dysfunctional and they were driving me crazy. And so what I did, Derek, I hired as a business coach a corporate psychological shrink who does leadership teams for big corporations. So he's like this guru in organizational development. And he tutored me for 2 years using my current clients as a base to try to come at them from a psychological and motivational approach. Very different.
And what made you do that? Just you were thinking there's got to be a new way, or?
There's got to be a better way. There's got to be a better way. You cannot just go as a consultant or staff and say to the board members, this is how it's supposed to be done, and expect them to agree with you. You have to come around beside them, behind them, and sidle up obliquely and make them think it's their idea. Right. And, some people call me manipulative, but I call it leadership.
I like it. All right. Well, Gail, go ahead and get started. Let's dive into some of the things you're going to talk about today, and I'm going to ask you a few questions along the way.
Okay. And shall I go ahead and advance the slides?
Yeah, go ahead, Gail.
Yeah, okay. Let's see. Okay, there we go. That's me. About 5 years ago. I think I've gotten a couple more wrinkles since then. But if anybody listening wants to get in touch with me, you can shoot me an email at gp@gailperry.com, and that's my Twitter handle too, Gail Perry NC, because I am, as you can tell, I'm Southern, and I'm from out of Raleigh, North Carolina.
And I would say, Gail, your attitude is wonderful, because Gail and I tend to be at a lot of the same conferences and so forth, and she'll definitely give you a feel like things are more positive than what they are.
Well, you got to look at the bright side, right?
That's right.
You got to look at the bright side. And speaking of the bright side, I am going to chat with everybody today about how to take our boards from bored to blazing. And if you're looking at the pictures in the PowerPoint, you've got a bunch of board members who are falling asleep. And I would suggest to you that many board meetings are this miserable, and people are wishing they could be anywhere else but the board meeting. And then how do you deal with a group of people like that and take them to be really chomping at the bit and ready to go? That is the job that we all have as nonprofit leaders and aspiring fundraisers. And I'm going to give you some ideas that really do work. Hooray, hooray. So here is, let me just set the stage. Let's talk about our innocent, well-meaning board members who don't know why they believe in the cause, they've never done any fundraising, and all of a sudden they get on the board, and then they're like, all of a sudden the staff starts saying, well, you need to help us fundraise, and they go, what? Did somebody say the F word? Board members are scared to death about fundraising, and they would probably do anything but fundraising, but the reason they're scared to death is that they have this mythology about fundraising that's making it up to be a very frightening experience. They think that fundraising is like begging on the street with the tin cup, please help me, I have nothing, and they picture themselves, hitting up their friends and begging people, and they think that's very distasteful. They also think that board members equate fundraising with cold calls. They think fundraising is asking strangers for money. And smart fundraisers know it's never about the asking. It's never about strangers, because you got to make friends first. And it's also never about money, because if you make fundraising all about money, you're shooting yourself in the foot, and you're making your cause very small rather than very large. So board members are making up all these horrible mythology dreams about what fundraising is. They imagine rejection. Now, who would blame an untrained volunteer for staying away from fundraising if that's what they think it all is? And so our job is to lower the pressure. Now, we have lots of jobs in this, and so let me tell you a quick story. And this story will tell you so many lessons. When I was writing my book, it's called Fired Up Fundraising, Turn Your Board's Passion into Action. I was writing my book, and I interviewed a friend of mine named Cece here in Raleigh, North Carolina, who is chair of the board of the Raleigh Little Theater. And I was interviewing her, and I said, well, Cece, tell me how you feel about fundraising. And she went, oh, fundraising, oh, whoa. And she started hyperventilating, and she said, I told them I'd do anything but fundraising if I were going to be chair of this board. And I mean, she was getting so upset that I just backed right off really quick. And then I said, well, Cece, let me ask you another question. I said, what if you were the ambassador from the Raleigh Little Theater over to Progress Energy, which is our big utility company here in Raleigh? And I knew her husband worked there, and I knew she knew a lot of people at Progress Energy. And I said, what if you were like the account manager in charge of the relationship between the Little Theater and Progress Energy? And I knew Progress Energy was a big funder, too, in town. And Cece said, oh, that would be so much fun. She said, I could give them free tickets. I could invite them to cast parties. I could invite them backstage. She was going on and on with this great big smile on her face. And listen, she then said to me, she said, I wouldn't mind going along on the solicitation if I'd done all that. And I thought, Lord have mercy, lady. You had just told me that you would never come close to fundraising. It was distasteful and horrible. And now, within 60 seconds, you're telling me you wouldn't mind doing it at all. So what are our lessons from that? Our lessons are that maybe we shouldn't use the F word. Maybe we should call it something else. And we all know that if Cece decided to tackle the relationship between Progress Energy and the Little Theater, and she started getting all those executives coming to cast parties and everything, do you think they'd be ready to give when she asked? I think so. So my whole approach is that we need to back off of solicitation with our board members. And I say to board members, you don't have to ask if you don't want to. But what you can do, there are plenty of other jobs that we urgently need you in that will directly impact the bottom line. And I'm showing you a slide now of a chart I made up for my book. I was sort of thinking about all the different jobs there are in the fundraising cycle, and we spend time identifying, and we spend time involving people, cultivating, and when they are ready, we ask, and then we thank. Now, this is more of a major donor cycle, which I hope you are always focusing on some major gifts, and that's where you want your board members to focus too. And so if you look at this pie chart, I've put here with identify, involve, ask, and thank. The ask is only one little tiny moment in the whole fundraising cycle. But the board members think the definition of fundraising is nothing but asking. They think the whole circle is colored bright red, and that every single activity in fundraising is related to soliciting. So therefore, we do have to redefine fundraising, I think, for our board members. And we need to back off. And we need to explain to them that there are lots of jobs that can be really fun. And so, my friends and colleagues who are listening, I want to give you some words of encouragement. Because I think I have some friends who started the North Carolina Opera Company, and I was interviewing him for my book, and he said, "Oh, the board. Oh, I can't do anything with them. That's the board." And I'm thinking, my friend, don't you have a hands-off approach with your board? You need to take charge. And so I think a lot of us think that we don't have any control. But I would suggest to you that your board members would be happy if somebody laid out to them what they could do to be productive. And your board members are busy volunteers. They need good staff support. They're happy to be led if they agree with the direction that they're going in. So the first thing I would say to you in terms of encouragement is to take charge and don't, ask for forgiveness, not permission. Don't you think that's a really important motto?
Absolutely.
Ask for forgiveness, not permission. When I was a big university fundraiser, that was my motto. It got me in trouble, but it raised me a lot of gifts. And so you can't be passive. And the other thing I would say to you, and I cannot emphasize this more strongly, is that you've got to make it fun for your volunteers, and you've got to lighten up, because they are scared to death of fundraising. And if you come in being all serious and you're not smiling and you go, guess what? They're going to pick up on your energy.
And Gail, this is something I want to ask you is a lot of this with how the tone and the presentation of how you do fundraising as an organization and how they act. Is it dependent upon what you're doing during the recruitment phase, trying to get them there to help sort of set the tone of what the expectation is? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think recruitment is really important. And I favor recruiting board members and putting a really big request in front of them and saying, listen, we're up to something huge this year, and this is why we need you of all people, and this is your role. But I would also say that lots of times when you set expectations, the board member will say, yeah, sure. And then nobody ever talks about those expectations the rest of the year. And then the staff is going, oh my gosh, the board won't do anything. They signed this expectation document. They're not doing it. That's why it's up to the staff to gently remind people what their job is. And so the expectations do not work unless they're discussed and talked about somewhat often. And I also think that the tone and the way we approach fundraising is very much related to how we as people, our colleagues and friends who are listening to this call, how we show up. Because our tone, our energy, our smile will create tension or lessen tension. And you probably may remember my number one fundraising motto after all these years is, when in doubt, throw a party.
I like it.
And I do not mean a fundraising event either, my goodness. What I mean is that if you are having fun, you will draw people to your cause. if your board meetings are fun and they're high energy, and your committee meetings and your emails and everything you do is like high energy, it's positive, it's enthusiastic, you will create positive energy, enthusiasm that follows you, and you will people are drawn to that, don't you think, Derek? That people
Absolutely.
are drawn to a big smile.
Absolutely.
So that's why I say I think we have more control than we think we have.
Yeah, and I think there's a thin sense of authenticity in that.
Yeah. And I was a little bit more scared when I'm older, and now that, when I was younger, and now that I've made every mistake possible, I've given up being serious. But I do an awful lot of public speaking, and I do a lot of board retreats, one-on-one with boards, and I deliberately model a tone of somewhat playfulness.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see how much we can enjoy ourselves while we learn all this stuff. And I engage them in conversation, and they are very open to my ideas. So that's why I think we all need to learn this psychological people skill leadership stuff, because it will help us in our career at multiple levels, don't you think?
Absolutely.
And so I'm going to share with you 5 of my favorite steps to get board members engaged and excited about fundraising. I know you might think this is mission impossible, but I kid you not, these steps really, really do work. Now, the first thing I think you need to do with your board is that you need to get them in touch with the passion they have in their heart for why they really care. And if you can do that, if you can awaken or fan the flame that they have inside their chest about their passion for the cause, you can get a lot out of them. But it's up to us to sort of awaken that energy. For example, I used to be a aspiring ballet dancer, when I was younger. And one time I went to the Carolina Ballet, and they invited me and my daughters backstage during the Nutcracker. And there's the Sugar Plum Fairy rehearsing and warming up, and and there are all these people back there, and I'm like in awe. I'm going, oh my gosh, everything is so beautiful. It was a transformationally joyous moment for me to be backstage so close to the dancers. Mm-hmm. And it ignited my passion for the cause. And so there are ways that you can do that. If you have a homeless shelter, or if you have an independent school, or whatever your cause is, your board members are there because they really do care. So let me share with you, how do you do that? And this is so easy, and it's so much fun. So I like to set up a conversation that is, why do you care about our organization? Why do you care about, this is so basic. And if you've ever been in any of my workshops, Derek, I like to get everybody out of their seats and talking to each other around the room about why they care. And I call this the mingle exercise. And if you want a step-by-step layout of how I do this exercise, it's on my blog. My blog is gailperry.com. And everything I'm talking about, by the way, is encapsulated in a little short 600-word article. So you can search, you can go to my website and search, put in some words and phrases. And this particular exercise is called Easy Elevator Speech Practice for Board Members. So not only are we helping them get in touch with their cause, but we're giving them practice with their personal elevator speech, which we really want them to be able to nail, right?
That's right.
And right here's a picture. This is the Southern Appalachian Highlands Trust Board Retreat in a log cabin. And the lady on the left is one of the most formidable board chairs I have ever run into. She's wonderful. And the young man on the right is the son of a very prominent philanthropic family in North Carolina. And so they're telling each other why they care. Now, do you think I can get a lot out of them after this conversation? You bet. You bet. And so one thing, I'm always playing around. I try to lighten it up. I tell the board members that they need to be sneezers. They need to sneeze the viral message to everybody they know and let it spread like a contagious epidemic. Viral marketing ideas are like viruses. And so I say to all my board members, I say, listen, if you don't do anything else, you need to sneeze on everybody you know. And they go, oh, yeah, I can do that. Sometimes when yesterday I was working with the Ohio Association of Healthcare Philanthropy, and there were all these hospital fundraisers, and we had some laughs about whether hospital boards can use the concept of sneezing the viral message or not.
Yeah.
They're a little nervous about sneezing. But what I'm doing is that I'm using metaphors that board members will remember and that they will enjoy. And they get the whole idea of sneezing on everybody they know. They don't have a problem with that. And, let me just back up. And one of the things I like about this sort of personal elevator speech approach is that board members, my friends, can nail this better than staff. And you know why? Because staff has way too much information. When you try to get the staff doing their elevator speech about why do they care about their organization, they start saying, they quote the mission statement and they talk about their programs. They talk about the what, but the board members don't know all the what. So they talk about the why. And the why, of course, is the powerful fundraising message. So this, again, when I do this and I bring this out in front of board members, they're encouraged to know that their natural inclination to talk about why they care is a very powerful conversation. So that's my step one, and the beauty of this fan the flames of their passion exercise is that you're accomplishing multiple objectives. You're getting them out of their seat and helping them get to know the other board members. They're finding commonality in why they care. It's a team building experience. They're literally practicing talking to people about the cause. Derek, you serve on a couple of boards, don't you?
Of course.
More than one, probably. Me too.
Mm-hmm.
I could really use more work on my messaging personally. I would welcome the chance to just take 10 minutes at the beginning of the next board meeting of my favorite cause and do this mingle exercise so I can practice my why I care. So I would, and I never, ever, ever, ever do a board retreat without starting here, because this changes everything. This changes everything. And so, I want to share 5 tips, and I just gave you my favorite tip for firing up my board. The second one, the first one, the elevator speech, is sort of all about emotion and energy and feeling good and, smiling and everything. This step number 2 is much more data driven. And I like to couple emotion with data all the time, like a good fundraiser. But the second step literally is I like to do an interview. Like, I'll take the CEO of the organization up in front of the board and I will say, okay, well, what is our annual budget? And the board members don't know your annual budget. I kid you not, they don't. And so the board members are thinking, what is our annual budget? I need to know this number. And so the CEO said, okay, it's $1.2 million. Okay, board members are starting to write it down. And I'll say, well, how much do we have to raise every year out of that $1.2 million? Is some of it earned? How much it is contributed? So the CEO might say, well, $800,000 is contributed. And board members are going, oh my gosh, I didn't know that number. They're thinking that to themselves. And then I'll say to the CEO, I'll say, how much do you have to bust your butt to raise every year out of that $800,000? And how much can you sort of count on coming in? And so what I'm doing, board members are really, really interested to know how much we have to bust our butt to raise. And what I'm doing is that I'm breaking down the fundraising program into a Q&A communication format that slowly delivers little tiny slivers of information to board members. Does that make sense, Derek?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I discovered this sort of interview format when I went to the AFP Faculty Training Academy, and I love it. Because if you interview somebody, you can get what you want out of them far better than if you are just making a straight presentation. We presented to our board members 1,000 times the budget and all our fundraising numbers, but they didn't remember it. So now it's a way to communicate with them. And then I shift over to, well, why does it cost so much? Why does it cost so much? And board members are fascinated to know this. I was working with the Boys and Girls Club, and I said, well, we've got a $5 million budget. How much does it cost to run these 5 facilities we have? What are the overhead costs? And they said, why do we have to have so much staff for the Boys and Girls Club? And we talked about insurance. We talked about all the stuff, and the board members are taking notes as hard as they can. And let me tell you a quick story. I was working with an independent school, and I was training the parents to how to ask for the parents fund. Parents asked each other they were going to raise $30,000. And so I interviewed the headmaster, and I said, well, where does this $30,000 go? And it turned out that we don't pay our teachers as much as the public school teachers are paid. And the parents did not know that. And we were talking about the fact that this $30,000 is really underwriting teacher salaries and scholarships. And I made the teacher situation real. I made the scholarship data real. The fact that the scholarship kids don't have money for uniforms, and the parents fund helps. The parents really appreciated that, because then when they went out to raise money, they had data. It wasn't like you're give to the black hole of the parents fund just for the good of the school. Instead, the parents could make a much different case that, listen, this is why we need this money. And so I think that many fundraisers, when they're training their board and their volunteers, they skip over these two very important steps: the fanning the flames of the passion inside everybody, and then also giving them more data, but giving them data in a format that they can remember and they can discuss and they can use in their own sentences and in their own solicitations. So, I think we're just I tell you, we don't train our board members.
Right.
And you and I have been training ourselves for years and years, and we can't expect people who are volunteers to be successful. And so I call this "What Are We Raising Money For?" a much broader conversation, much broader. It's when we take the numbers and we translate them into people. And on the screen, I don't know if everybody's really going to be looking at my handout, but here are 10 terrific questions that you can ask your board members, or we can have the conversation about, like, why do we even need private contributions? Why does it cost so much? Where does the money go exactly? So, these are really interesting questions to talk about with your board. And so now let me talk about your board at some of these board meetings. I'm going to recommend to you, my friends, that the first thing you do is cancel your next board meeting and take everybody on a field trip.
I like field trips.
So that you can get your board members in touch with the wonderful work you do changing the world. Make your board members happy. So ever so briefly, I'm going to share with you some of my opinions about nonprofit boards. And here is the problem. I've got a picture here of Egyptian statues carved into the stone wall. And I would say to you that, is this your board? Is your board like frozen in time Egyptian statues? Or are they rocking and rolling with the fired up sign ready to go to work? And our challenge, like I said earlier, is to take our board members from stiff and frozen to excited and vigorous. And so one of our challenges is that board meetings themselves are a terrible experience. And I would say that if you want to drive the passion and energy out of any group of people, then run a meeting with Robert's Rules of Order. God help me, I'm starting on Robert's Rules. And so what you need to do is that you need to blow up the agenda and weave some different kinds of experiences into your board meeting. I mean, Robert's Rules, you've got like the boring stuff first. You've got minutes, committee reports, and the fun stuff, new businesses, at the very end, and usually you've run out of time, right? Mm-hmm. So we need to do something about the board meetings. We need to make them far more interesting. And I've got a little handout on my website called 12 ways to liven up your board meetings. And I mean, Derek, just board meetings could be the subject of a whole webinar. Mm-hmm. But I will say that when I was working with the healthcare people in Ohio yesterday, one fundraiser said that her board had adopted a consent agenda, where all the business stuff was sent out ahead of time. And they also established ground rules themselves for the consent agenda. And they decided that if you have a question about anything on the consent agenda, you get in touch with the chair and discuss it, and the chair will decide y'all both decide whether it's something important enough to bring it in front of the whole board. So therefore, then that controls the time. You have a consent agenda and somebody pulls out the financial board and they, well, I don't understand this number, and then you spend 20 minutes with everybody discussing this little tiny detail and you've missed the important stuff you really needed to talk about. So that's just one way. I love the idea of board members setting ground rules themselves. Mm-hmm. It's much, much safer for us politically. And so now I've given you my three or four favorite ideas. Here's another one in that remember my number one motto is when in doubt, throw a party. Well, I think that we are missing something really important with our board members, that they want to get to know each other. In fact, if you survey board members, one of the reasons they want to join a board is to get to know each other. And so social time that is structured into each board meeting is an important part of board member satisfaction. And the reason, social time has many, many benefits to the group because it builds trust. It builds personal relationships. It builds that magic feeling called collegiality, that we're all in it together. And I would suggest perhaps that your board members don't all know each other. So how can you have a group of people running $1 million company and they don't know each other? You can't expect effective governance. And it also builds team. We all say, oh my gosh, I want my board to function as a team, a happy team. Well, if they don't know each other, they can't possibly function as a team at all. And so my last favorite big idea, and this I touched on this a little bit at the very beginning, is you need to redefine fundraising into friend making. And here's the reason. There's serious methodology and data behind this suggestion. Because did you see, Derek, the new infographics from Bloomerang about the new
donor retention?
Donor attrition, yeah. And so the new numbers on donor attrition are horrifying. I don't have them in this presentation, but I hope everybody who is listening is aware that we are losing vast numbers of our donors every year who are not renewing, and the attrition rate is just abysmal, particularly on new gifts. And I spent a lot of time with my group yesterday in Ohio focusing on this area of what can we do productively with our current donors to keep them on board with us and keep them giving. Because, for example, if you have a retention figure of only 50%, which means that half of your donors are leaving every year and not renewing, what if your board got all over this retention number and they decided they wanted to raise it to 60%? You could even run the numbers. And what is 10% of your donor base worth to you? It probably might be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so if you, I would suggest that is the easy money for your board to focus on, is the care and feeding of current donors, so that you can get them to renew. And I think this may be my next to the last slide, is that here I'm a great fan of Penelope Burke's research, and this is her famous study that she did with a group in Canada, and we wanted to test and see what kind of impact a board member thank you call would have on future gifts. And so they took 1 out of every 10 gifts of this phone mail campaign and had a board member make a phone call. And the next time they solicited the groups, the people who got the phone call gave 39% more money than the people who did not give the phone call. So one thing I love about this data is that it demonstrates conclusively that board members can directly impact the bottom line without asking for money. Hooray! They're thanking rather than soliciting. So, all the big fundraising pundits are just yelling and screaming right now about this new report about retention numbers going down even more. And if we could focus our wonderful board members on, as we say in the South, I'm going to love on you a little bit, honey. Loving on your current donors. What would that do to your bottom line? It would make a huge difference. And I love one of the things that business people, board members really understand is that I share the study sometimes. There was a study of businesses that it costs a business 10 times more money to bring in a new customer to the business than it does to get more money out of a current customer. And that I would suggest that same ratio probably holds for nonprofits.
Right.
It may cost us 10 times more to bring in a new donor than to renew an old one. And I think the reason we don't really are not paying enough attention to retention is that we're losing donors, but we're bringing new ones in at the same rate. And so our numbers of donors stay stable. So we think we're okay. But what it is nothing but churn, because the same number that leave are the same number that come in.
Mm-hmm.
So this, I think, frankly, Derek, this is the cutting edge of where fundraising needs to be focusing on today, is the care and feeding of current donors and getting these retention numbers up. And so I think that if we lighten up with our board members, if we take charge and shift their energy, if we fan the flames of their passion by asking them why they care, if we give them great data on why we need the money and how the money's being spent, and if we make our board meetings more interesting and more lively, and we give them social time so they can bond with each other and create a team experience, I think that we can get an awful lot more out of our board members than we're getting right now.
So, Gail, I have a question with you with regard to the give-get, right? So I'm sure you've encountered board members that very passionate and could be fired up, but don't give.
I think that is an expectation that needs to be discussed openly, and that, frankly, I have no room for a board member who doesn't understand that they need to give. There are many ways you can approach that. You can say, we need all the board gifts in by March. And so if you haven't given yet, it may be an oversight and there's a pledge card under your agenda at your place. Or there's a pledge card in your board packet. Because I do think that many board members forget, and they don't know if they've given or not. And let me just share, too, that I'm chair of the board governance committee for my favorite nonprofit. And when I'm vetting new board members, I call them up and I say, listen, we don't have a formal giving policy, but I want you to know that every single member of the board is giving at the $1,000 level. You don't have to,
Right.
But we all are.
Modeling behavior.
And then I say, is that something you could consider? You might want to consider. Because lots of times board members want to know what the expectation is. They want to fit in with their peers. And they do not want to be surprised to find out. We have one person who's actually not giving at the $1,000 level, but she's giving to the overall cause, just not all of it to us. And she's the youngest member on the board. But I think give-get is appropriate. I think that the higher performing boards that I have worked with have a give-get policy, and they're not embarrassed about it. But again, it depends on where your board is in its evolution and its culture. And it's very important to understand that the board members have got to agree to this and establish this themselves, that it cannot come from staff. Staff can suggest it behind the scenes and manage it, but officially it's got to come from the board members.
Agreed.
What do you think, Derek?
I completely agree. I think it also takes a very effective chairman of the board to bring up uncomfortable conversations like that and make people feel comfortable with it too.
And also, a governance committee can be a great political cover for something like that. Because as a group of people, if the governance committee is among the most trusted and long-term members of the board, if the governance committee as a group comes up with a suggestion and also facilitates a wide-ranging conversation with the board members to get everybody to buy into it, then it becomes a group decision, not from one person.
Yeah. And I have another question kind of in that line too, is now how do you get people fired up initially to sign up for things, but then when you continue to put the pleas out there to help us, and participating, you don't get any participation still. I mean, at some point, you got to have probably a hard conversation with the group.
Yeah. No, I think pleading to board members to participate is a lost cause. You're not going to get, I mean, the plea doesn't help. What you need to do, you may be having too many events.
Mm-hmm.
And you may need to say to the board members, listen, we're having 5, but I really need you there for these 2. And you need to get the chairperson, or it needs to come from not the staff. The chairperson needs to say, listen, okay, we need everybody at this event. Who can come and who can't come? I want to know who can and can't come. And also, one strategy that's very motivational is to praise the people in front of the other board members who do perform at the level that you want, just like you do with your kids or your spouse.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you encourage positive behavior. And so I think board members are acutely tuned to the idea of looking good in front of their peers and fitting into the group culture, and they pay attention to that. So therefore, I think, taking a more psychological, motivational approach will help you win more than taking the direct plea.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
We have time now for some questions and things. I think we're close to the end here. So feel free to put those into the chat session, those of you that are live today with us. For a couple of things I want to ask you, and these are maybe more tactical for you.
Yeah.
How much information do you give them, both in paper form or in advance to your meetings? What would you recommend?
Well, that's really interesting. I am a very busy person, and I don't really like to look at a lot of paper anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But whenever I am going to a meeting where I think I really need to be prepared, I want to get hold of that paper early. But I think it's very easy to overdo the paper.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I think that we want to show up to them like we're working really hard. And so therefore we're showering them with paper. So you need to vet everything you send to them under a need to know. And if I would also suggest that if you send them too much financial stuff, you're asking for trouble.
Mm-hmm.
and you're asking for distraction instead of what you really need them to do. Maybe you really need to have an open conversation about how we're going to make our gala a big success this year. Yeah. And who's going to do what, and what were our learnings last year, and how can we do it differently this year? But also, lots of times the real work happens in smaller groups of committees, and the board meeting is more of a show and tell and a coming together to be sure everybody's on the same page, and let's all figure out what our next step is. My favorite boards, the big discussions happen in committee, and then the committee will take something big to the rest of the board, and we'll have a very wide-ranging discussion.
Yeah.
Is that an answer?
Absolutely. And this kind of goes into a follow-up question that I received via email here. Gail, would love to know your thoughts on not only how to get them excited in the board meetings themselves, but excited about horrible topics such as finances, especially when you're not having a good performing month.
Well, first of all, I would try to not use the word horrible because we might want to use the word challenging, right? Instead of horrible. And the person presenting the numbers needs to present it in context. Is this a crisis or is this just cash flow?
Right.
And sometimes when there's a financial report to be presented, I like to, I have a financial background and I really love numbers, and I'm going, oh my gosh, what a story these numbers are telling me. Oh, I can't believe like drama in these numbers, but other people are going numbers. I don't do numbers. And so you never know what kind of board members you have around the table. But here's a suggestion, is that there's a rule of 3. Okay, here are 3 things you need to know about this report. And here are 3 trends that you need to pay attention to in this report. And here's what the finance committee needs from the rest of the board members to do our job better.
Mm.
If every committee had a format like that, it would be more interesting. 3 things you need to know, three trends and numbers. Like if you were presenting a gala report, you wouldn't say three trends, but you might say, here are three things you need to know about our success, and here are three learnings that we had, and here's what we need from the rest of the board. So there are ways to play around with the format. We are not locked in to Robert's Rules of Order. We can take liberties and make things more interesting, and our board members would be immensely grateful to us forever if we made things more interesting.
And that kind of goes into this next question, which I think is around the concepts of working with the board where you don't feel like you're getting, from the staff perspective, helping the board get there. So the comment is here. I felt in one instance, for example, it was a special event in which that I tried to convince the board the reasons why that we should not be doing it. Of course, I must not have done a great job because the board elected to do it anyway. It feels like even though this was a bad decision and it ended up being a bad financial decision for us long term, I could not help lead the board there. Gail, do you have any ideas on how to help lead a board when you know the decision should be made somewhere different from what they're thinking?
Totally. You've got to be a little sneakier, okay? A little bit more oblique. And what I would do is get a couple of board members privately in my back pocket, one-on-one, and I would go to the board members and I'd say, listen, this is something that's on my mind. I want to know what you think about this thing that I'm wrestling with. From my perspective, I see this, and this with this event. What are your impressions of the event and our bottom line? What do you think? And so you gradually move them around. It's like slowly turning a boat. You don't come right at these people and beg them not to do the event for these reasons, but instead you plant a seed and then you withdraw and let them mull over the seed. So all of a sudden, as the more they think about it, the more they might agree with you. See, it's much more subtle. It's more sales. It's more psychological. And if you think about it, it is a more natural conversation. That if you come right up at somebody with a formal presentation, you will you immediately maybe get their back up against the wall because they're taken by surprise and they're defensive. And in fact, a good friend of mine, Andrea Kilstead, is one of the great fundraiser, author, consultants of the world. I'm going to spell her name because you need to go find this blog post. Her name is Andrea, Andrea Kilstedt, Kilstedt, Kilstedt. And I can't remember the name of her blog, but she published a post yesterday talking about how to use intentional conversation to get your husband to take you out to dinner.
Boy, don't let my wife see that. No, I'm just joking.
But the steps were oblique. And it was that she has a book called, she's writing a book about asking as an intentional conversation. They're little tiny incremental steps that get somebody from where they are to a whole new position and they don't know what happened.
That's great.
Because you did not confront them, you planted the seed and withdrew, and little by little you led them down the path. So be a little bit sneakier and more psychological, get some board members on your side and let them lead the discussion. Let them be the persuaders of the other board members, and it may take a year. You're not going to get this decided in one meeting. So don't take it as a defeat, take it as a learning experience.
Good. All right, I have a really interesting one for you now. This is a great one.
Okay.
So Gail,
this is fun.
I was excited to find that one of my board members wanted to attend a donor meeting with me. I couldn't be more excited, more happy for this opportunity. In the time that I had been leading this organization for the last 7 years, this has never happened that somebody volunteers without me prodding. We got to the meeting with the donor, and then it was my nightmare. The individual decided, my board member decided to completely not only go off script, but mention personal things that felt uncomfortable for us all. I don't think I could even look at him after this was done. I have a question. How do you encourage a board member not to participate when they really want to participate in fundraising, when they're not that good and you know it could potentially harm a relationship? I know the best thing would probably be to have a personal conversation, which I have tried, but they have verbally told other board members how great it was to be in that meeting with me.
Oh, my goodness gracious. Wow. I publish a blog post newsletter once every Friday morning, and we're recording this on a Friday morning. And so this morning's newsletter, my one article this week is about the 3 most important goals for any donor visit.
Yeah.
3 most important goals. And the 3 goals are, number 1, to establish a long-term relationship with the donor. Number 2, find out where the donor stands. And number 3, find out what follow-up steps you can have to maintain the relationship. And many people, board members, do have no idea that these will be the goals. They think they're supposed to go in there and make a presentation and do all the talking. And talking too much is the kiss of death. So I've been writing a lot about the major donor visit this month. And I'm doing actually a free webinar this afternoon in about an hour to the world on how to make a successful call on a major donor. You have got to educate these people, and you have got to take control. And I would suggest it's not going to get you fired at all. A quick story, one of these Ohio fundraisers yesterday told me that he took the CEO of his hospital to visit a donor. And this guy, the fundraiser, had a really good relationship with the donor, and they're talking, and all of a sudden the fundraiser says to the donor, "Is this something that you could see your company supporting?" And the fundraiser was quiet, because that's what you're supposed to do, to let, you pop the question, you're supposed to be quiet. Well, the CEO jumped in and started talking. And so after the visit, the fundraiser said to his CEO, he said, listen, now fundraising 101 is you got to stay away from this. You got to back off. And so this fundraiser had a cordial enough relationship with his boss that he could be very instructive. And he said that make it playful. You can get more if you lighten up. For a Christmas present, he gave his CEO a certificate in Fundraising 101 that the CEO had passed the test of being able to ask and not say anything after you ask. So he made his point. But you got to call the barricades down on this board member and come up with reasons why they can't go on a call with you, and bring in the board chair, bring in your boss. It can't happen again.
Yeah.
I'm sorry for you. Bring me in and I'll give them talking to. Or send articles from my blog, because I can provide political cover for you. That might be a real strategy.
All right. Last question. And this is a short question, but maybe you have a big or long answer. But the question is, we involve our fundraising staff directly with board members, especially during committee time, including our special events. What is your view upon direct interaction between fundraising staff and board members when the CEO may not be there?
I think that's fine. I think the CEO has got to trust the staff, and the CEO and the staff have got to have a close enough relationship that staff can go to the CEO and say, listen, I just wanted you to know that this is what the board member said, and this is what's on their mind. So the CEO has got to have a trusting relationship with the staff members. Some CEOs will not let staff interact with board members, and I think that's inappropriate, but the CEO could have good reason. So I think that you have to establish ground rules, and it's your job as the fundraiser to develop a trusting relationship with your CEO, that you will tell him or her what you hear, and they will probably really appreciate having somebody who will speak the truth to them about what their board members are saying. Yeah. Great point. That's a very smart question.
Great. All right. Gail, thank you so much.
Derek, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you. And thank you, everybody, for joining us in the live version today. We really appreciate that. Again, this session is recorded. We'll be able to provide it to you within the next couple of weeks. We'll also let you know via our newsletter when it does come out. You can also get the PowerPoint presentation by downloading it in our Achieve Access area. Gail, thanks again for your time. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Derek.
All right.
Enjoyed visiting with you.
Same here. Take care, everybody, and we look forward to joining and having you joining us in our next session. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.